All right. Last live. They kicked me off the last live. I don't know what happened. It was the government. And the government kicked me off the live. It's all good though. We back. It's because it might be because it's battery. Okay. It's all good. We back. I remember where we left off at. I was in the middle of saying something, but it's all good. Let's pick back up. Top of page 30. No, actually no. Middle of page 30. Damn. Middle of page 31. Let me know how this audio sounds too. I hope I'm sounding good. Acceptance of nonviolent direct action was a proof of asserted sophistication on the part of the black masses, for it showed that they dared to break with the old, ingrained concepts of our society. The eye for an eye philosophy, the impulse to defend oneself when attacked, has always been hailed as the highest measure of American manhood. We are a nation that worships the frontier tradition, and our heroes are those who champion justice through violent retaliation against injustice. It is not simple to adopt the credo that moral force has as much strength and virtue as the capacity to return a physical blow, or that to refrain from hitting back requires more will and bravery than the automatic reflexes of defense. Yet there is something in the American ethos that responds to the strength of moral force. I am reminded of the popular and widely respected novel and film To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch, a white Southern lawyer, confronts a group of his neighbors who have become a lynch-crazed mob seeking the life of his black client. Finch, armed with nothing more lethal than a law book, disperses the mob with the force of his moral courage, aided by his small daughter, who, innocently calling the would-be lynchers by name, reminds them that they are individual men, not a pack of beasts. And then I think that's important as well. When we speak about, sometimes I think that people, when we've been down at City Market or down at some of these protests, and people have recognized the officers and know past actions of these officers, and they call out these officers' names and their past actions, or call out their badge numbers and lawsuits that they may have been named in, or other things that they may have been involved in. I think that people take that as a personal attack, or take that as some type of form of humiliation, but I don't think that at all that's what that is. I think that when those things are in my opinion, that when those things are called out, that is just like what they're speaking of this young child doing with calling the lynchers out by name and reminding them about the fact that they are people aside from being these racist this racist mob, and it's the same thing with these police officers. You should if Owen McGinnis is at City Market, or if Dominic McNeese is at City Market, or Carla Red, or Kurt Wisenhan, all these different people who have committed these violent acts, and now they're grouped together in the midst of doing more violent acts, they should be reminded that they should be reminded of the trauma of their past violent actions, to try to bring them back to some type of reality, to remind them of the fact that especially at some of these protests and demonstrations, when they would be grouped together, like when they come down for the memorials at 4 a.m, and there's 15 of them, 15 of them. It's a group think mentality, and whoever is the person that's in charge, they all just do the same things and do whatever this person that's in charge and ask them to do, as if they have no free will. So I think it's important to remind them of the individual actions that they have taken, to remind them of the people who they have victimized, the families that they have traumatized, to try to maybe wake them from their whatever type of state of mind they must be in, to just move through the world working violence in this, on a daily basis. And I'm probably not making that correlation with the best linguistics. I know one of these. Say anybody. I'm just letting you know. You say something racist in the comments, I'm just gonna ban you on camera. We already just banned. I don't know who dude was. Go back, watch the old video. Whoever he was, he got banned. All right, let's hop back in it. To the black people in 1963, as to Atticus Finch, it had become obvious that nonviolence could symbolize the gold badge of heroism rather than the white feather of cowardice. In addition to being consistent with their religious precepts, it served their need to act on their own for their own liberation. It enabled them to transmute hatred into constructive energy, to seek not only to free themselves, but to free their oppressor from their sins. This transformation, in turn, had the marvelous effect of changing the face of the enemy. The enemy the black people faced became not the individual who had oppressed them, but the evil system which permitted that individual to do so. The argument that nonviolence is a coward's refuge lost its force as its heroic and often perilous acts uttered their wordless but convincing rebuttal in Montgomery, in the sit-ins, on the freedom rides, and finally in Birmingham. There is a powerful motivation when a suppressed people enlist in an army that marches under the banner of nonviolence. A nonviolent army has a magnificent universal quality. To join an army that trains its adherents in the methods of violence, you must be of a certain age. But in Birmingham, some of the most valued foot soldiers were youngsters ranging from elementary pupils to teenage high school and college students. For acceptance in the armies that maim and kill, one must be physically sound, possessed of straight limbs and accurate vision. But in Birmingham, the lame and the halt and the crippled could and did join up. Al Hibbler, the sightless singer, would never have been accepted in the United States Army or the army of any other nation, but he held a commanding position in our ranks. In armies of violence, there is a caste of rank. In Birmingham, outside of the few generals and lieutenants who necessarily directed and coordinated operations, the regiments of the demonstrators marched in democratic phalanx. I think I'm messing that word up. Doctors marched with window cleaners. Lawyers demonstrated with laundresses. PhDs and no-Ds were treated with perfect equality by the registrars of the nonviolent movement. As the broadcasting profession will confirm, no shows are so successful as those which allow for audience participation. In order to be somebody, people must feel themselves part of something. In the nonviolent army, there is room for everyone who wants to join up. There is no color distinction. There is no examination, no pledge, except that, as a soldier in the armies of violence is expected to inspect his carbine and keep it clean, nonviolent soldiers are called upon to examine and burnish their greatest weapons, their heart, their conscience, their courage, and their sense of justice. Nonviolent resistance paralyzed and confused the power structures against which it was directed. The brutality with which officials would have quelled the black individual became impotent when it cannot be pursued with stealth and remain unobserved. It was caught, as a fugitive from a penitentiary is often caught, in gigantic circling spotlights. It was imprisoned in a luminous glare revealing the naked truth to the whole world. It is true that some demonstrators suffered violence and that a few paid the extreme penalty of death. They were the martyrs of last summer who laid down their lives to put an end to the brutalizing of thousands who have been beaten and bruised and killed in dark streets and back rooms of sheriff's offices day in and day out in hundreds of summers past. Okay, and I think it's important to point out there, this is in 1963 where they're speaking about, oh man, the battery dying. It's all types of technical difficulties. I'm gonna have to go get another battery. All right, I'm gonna go get another battery. One second. I'll be right back. Right back. Okay. I had to go get another battery for the phone. All right, let's get back to it. Okay, I just wanted to say that, we're reading something that took place in 1963, and they're talking about this police terrorism that's taking place. And so I think that it's important to realize we're in 2020, and this police terrorism is something that is still heavily ingrained into the society of not only just America, but the city of Rockford, Illinois as well. So these are things that were taking place in 1963, Birmingham, Alabama, that correlate directly to things that are taking place in 2021, Rockford, Illinois. The striking thing about the nonviolent crusade of 1963 was that so few felt the sting of bullets or the clubbing of billies and nightsticks. Looking back, it becomes obvious that the oppressors were restrained not only because the world was looking, but because also standing before them were hundreds, sometimes thousands of black people who for the first time dared to look back at a white man eye to eye. Whether through a decision to exercise wise restraint or the operation of a guilty conscience, many a hand was stayed on a police club and many a fire hose was restrained from vomiting forth its pressure. That the revolution was a comparatively bloodless one is explained by the fact that the black people did not merely give lip service to nonviolence. The tactics the movement utilized and that guided far-flung actions in cities dotted across the map discouraged violence because one side would not resort to it and the other was so often immobilized by confusion, uncertainty, and disunity. Nonviolence had tremendous psychological importance to the black people. They had to win and to vindicate themselves. They had to win and to vindicate their dignity in order to merit and enjoy their self-esteem. They had to let white people know that the picture of them as a clown, irresponsible, resigned, and believing in his own inferiority, was a stereotype with no validity. This method was grasped by the black masses because it embodied the dignity of struggle, of moral conviction, and self-sacrifice. The black people were able to face their adversary, to concede to them a physical advantage, and to defeat them because the superior force of the oppressor had become powerless. To measure what this meant to the black people may not be easy, but I am convinced that the courage and discipline with which black thousands accepted nonviolence healed the internal wounds of black millions who did not themselves march in the streets or sit in the jails of the South. Okay, and what is happening with the phone not charging? Hold on 1 second. The phone trying to die. The phone might die. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble trying to get through this book. A lot of technical difficulties as I read through this book. It's the government. All right, so phone might die in the midst of this live. Hopefully not. Let's keep on going. Okay, and then I want to just point out how they're speaking about hundreds marching in the streets and they're speaking about how thousands marched in the streets and sat in the jails, but how it healed millions who did not participate in that. And I think the same thing can be said here, where maybe there may be 10 to 20 participants in some of the demonstrations here at the past couple city markets, or last year it might have been 50 to 75 people, or when we marched after Faustin was murdered and after Jose was shot, it may have been 50 to 75 people, but I 100% believe that it is thousands of people, the views in our inboxes and comments and some of the social media presence and the presence that's felt here on this street in this area all the time. reaffirms that thousands of people are being healed by these things. Thousands of people's consciousness are being awakened and stirred from these things. Thousands of peoples are becoming waking themselves up out of lethargy, and thousands of people are questioning things that that have been so long accepted as societal norms in this city. And so I think that that's an important thing to point out of emphasis is. A lot of times people speak to you about some of Dr. King's beliefs or some of the things that some of Dr. King's quotes. And I think that it's important that us as activists and organizers and demonstrators and protesters, and I do believe that it is, again, it may be a small amount of people watching this video and at the moment that is being filmed, but I do believe this will be repeated and watched by and digested by hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people at some point. And a lot of those people will be people who are getting involved in nonviolent action and nonviolent direct action and getting involved in demonstrations and organizing. And so I think it's important that we do understand some of the people who have been in this struggle before us and some of their beliefs and some of their ideology, and especially people who are as prominent as Dr. King, so that way they can't be used as weapons against us, or people can't tell half-truths about what they believed to try to dissuade us from the actions that we're currently taking. So let's continue. We're on page 35 of Why We Can't Wait by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. For black people all over this nation to identify with the movement, to have pride in those who were the principals, and to give moral, financial, or spiritual support were to restore to them some of the pride and honor which had been stripped from them over the centuries. In the light of last summer's successful crusade, one might ask why it took black people 8 years to apply the lessons of the Montgomery boycott to the problems of Birmingham and the nation's other Birminghams, North and South. Rockford is Birmingham. A methodology and philosophy of revolution is neither born nor accepted overnight. From the moment it emerges, it is subjected to rigorous tests, opposition, scorn, and prejudice. The old guard in any society resents new methods, for old guards wear the decorations and medals won by waging battle in the accepted manner. Often, opposition comes not only from the conservatives who cling to tradition, but also from the extremist militants who favor neither the old nor the new. And I think that's a place that we are directly at right now in Rockford, Illinois, especially as an organization, as the May 30th Alliance organization, with some of the things that we have been dealing with recently, where you do have this old guard of black people, or this old guard of people who believe that the way to try to change things is by buddying up with the city, is by getting in bed with the enemy, is by trying to cozy up to the white power structure and to these white institutions in hopes that they can garner or build a brand, or garner or build capital, or garner or build some type of privilege or opportunity for themselves. And for so long in the city, that's been the way to do things and how things work, and just pushing the narrative of voting and electoral politics and things of that nature. And you can see that as we come in as an organization with a different methodology and with different tactics and different ideology, you can see the struggle that's being waged. You can see the silence that happens from black community leaders or black prominent leaders, people who should be quote unquote leaders, when memorials are taken down, or when someone is shot down in the streets by these corrupt, crooked, bloodthirsty Gestapo police officers. You can sense the silence that happens, and it's because they've chosen a different way. They've chosen to make phone calls in private or to have meetings in private, but not to publicly condemn these actions being taken by these institutions. And so as we begin to publicly condemn these actions, as we begin to publicly bring these things to the forefront, you can sense that old guard struggling. The NAACP and is part of that old guard. Some of the people that are used for clickbait for some of these news stories are part of that old guard. Some of the people down at City Market and working with City Market, though they may be younger in age, they are part of that old guard. And we are here to again to present what we believe a better option that is allows us to be directly involved in this, to not be doing lip service. But besides that, again, that's just to bring up the correlations. And then also the New Guard, they're not New Guard, but opposition from not just the conservatives, which those are the people who were speaking about as conservatives, but to the extremist militants. You know, I'm not calling anybody extremist militants, but there are different groups of people who feel as if the way that we're trying to do things is the wrong way as well, who feel like things should be done differently than the manner that we're doing them. Many of these extremists misread the significance and intent of nonviolence because they fail to perceive that militancy is also the father of the nonviolent way. Angry exhortation from street corners and stirring calls for the black people to arm and go forth to do battle stimulate loud applause. But when the applause dies, the stirred and the stirring return to their homes and lie in their beds for still one more night with no progress in view. They cannot solve the problem they face because they have offered no challenge but only a call to arms, which they themselves are unwilling to lead, knowing that doom would be its reward. They cannot solve the problem because they seek to overcome a negative situation with negative means. They cannot solve the problem because they do not reach and move into sustained action the large groups of people necessary to attract attention and convey the determination of the majority. The conservatives who say, quote, let us not move so fast, end quote, and the extremists who say, quote, let us go out and whip the world, end quote, would tell you that they are as far apart as the poles. But there's a striking parallel. They accomplish nothing, for they do not reach the people who have a crying need to be free. One factor that helps to explain why the black people nationally did not embrace the nonviolent ethic immediately after Montgomery was a fallacious and dangerously divisive philosophy spread by those who were either dishonest or ignorant. This philosophy held that nonviolent direct action was a substitute for all other approaches, attacking especially the legal methods that up to the mid-50s had brought such important decisive court rulings and laws into being. The best way to defeat an army is to divide it. Black people as well as whites have compounded confusion and distorted reality by defending the legal approach and condemning direct action, or defending direct action and condemning the legal approach. And that again gets us to where I have spoken of multiple times, where I tell people that it wasn't one. We didn't get into this situation by just one manner of thinking. We didn't get into this situation from just one train of thought. We didn't get into this situation from just one ideology. And when I say we, at this moment, I'm speaking about black people in America. But this also correlates to poor people in America, or working class people in America, or brown people in America, or any oppressed community in America. Or exploited community in America, which is just about every community in some sense of a manner deals with oppression or exploitation, unless you are the one doing the oppression and exploiting. But that's neither here nor there. What we are doing in being occupying City Hall, what we are doing at City Market, what we are doing by putting memorials up, what we are doing by putting chalk on sidewalks, what we are doing by marching in the streets, what we have done with die-ins and protests and demonstrations at crosswalks and sirens and megaphones and music, all of these different things that we have done are not to say that people should not run for alderman, or not to say that people should not vote, or not to say that people should not attend city hall meetings, or it's not to say that people should not try to put together community review boards, or it's not to say that there shouldn't be a oh man, this battery tripping. Or it's not to say that there shouldn't, be these other things taking place. It's to supplement those things. It's to change the consciousness at the same time that these policies are being changed. It's to say that both of these things need to be happening at the same time. And too often our problem has been that it has only been one, and the one that has been trying to change policy, trying to get a vote, trying to engaging in electoral politics, engaging in going to meetings and things of that nature. And so we have to, oh man, it's really not. And so we have to get to a place again, and this is what we are doing, where we are adding more things to that, where this is every day there's something being challenged. Even people who can't attend meetings, or people who can't vote or won't vote, or people, So again, what this is just, as we're going through and reading these things, what we want to do is to not just be getting in arbitrary information and to just be reading through paragraphs and passages and not being able to cross-reference how these things directly relate to what we are dealing with today in Rockford, Illinois. And so when people, again, and one of the things that has been a common misunderstanding and one of the common things of forms of misinformation has been people just not understanding the purpose of protesting, not understanding the purpose of demonstrations historically. And so I think that is why this specific book is important for us to be reading. Direct action is not a substitute for work in the courts and the halls of government. Bringing about passage of a new and broad law by a city council. Let's try that one more time. Direct action is not a substitute for work in the courts and the halls of government. Bringing about passage of a new and broad law by a city council, state legislature, or the Congress, or pleading cases before the courts of the land does not eliminate the necessity for bringing about the mass dramatization of injustice in front of a city hall. Indeed, direct action and legal action complement one another. When skillfully employed, each becomes more effective. Thank you. Have a good day. And again, and this is something specifically talking about what we're doing right here in this moment. And that's, let's read through this again, where it says, bringing about a passage of a new and broad law by a city council, like body cameras, state legislature or the Congress, like the police reform bill, or pleading cases before the court. Hey, how y'all doing? How y'all doing? Y'all have a good day. Be safe out there. Thank you. Love y'all. Okay, let's try my phone. Bringing about passage of a new and broad law by a city council, like body cameras, which just happened here recently, state legislature or the Congress, like the police reform bill that just was passed recently, or pleading cases before the courts of the land, like is what's happening with Jovan Fresco, does not eliminate the necessity for bringing about the mass dramatization of injustice in front of a city hall. And that is what we are doing by having pictures of Denzel Duvine in front of City Hall. That is what we are doing by having chalk on the sidewalk of City Hall. That is what we are doing by putting the faces and the dates they were killed of the people who are the macrocosm, the macro aggressions of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. That is what we are doing, is we are dramatizing these issues so that way people understand why it needs to be body cameras. So that way when they see the videos from the body cameras, they understand the inherent wrong immoral actions of violence taking place, instead of just being institutionalized and thinking whatever a police officer does is right because he's a police officer. So that way, when you have a police reform bill, when they talk about no cash bail, when they talk about these different things that they want to change, people can actually implement them the proper way instead of trying to corrupt those things, because they have changed their train of thought, because they have changed their consciousness, they have unlearned certain things, and that's what we are trying to do by dramatizing these things. And so again, when people say, well, Dr. King would have done it like this, or Martin Luther King Jr. said this or said that, which have been said an innumerable amount of times while we have been out here. Kurt Wisenhand, the assistant deputy chief, specifically brought up Dr. King. And again, as we were outside of City Hall, as if to say that this is something that Dr. King wouldn't do. And again, the reason that has happened is because Kurt Wisenhand went to the public school systems or the private school systems in America, and they trained people there. They train them to have certain lines of thinking, so that way they can dictate the actions that these people take as they grow and go into the society, so that way they can keep the status quo where it is at. And so again, that is why it is important for us to go back and to read these things, and not only to read them, but to be informed about what we are dealing with in present day, and then to be able to cross-reference the information and the words in this literature to the actions and the events that are going on right here in Rockford, Illinois. 2021. Indeed, direct action and legal action complement one another. When skillfully employed, each becomes more effective. The chronology of the sit-ins confirms this observation. Spontaneously born, but guided by the theory of nonviolent resistance, the lunch counter sit-ins accomplished integration in hundreds of communities at the swiftest rate of change in the civil rights movement up to that time. Yet, Many communities successfully resisted lunch counter desegregation and pressed charges against the demonstrators. It was correct and effective that demonstrators should fill the jails, but it was necessary that these foot soldiers for freedom not be deserted to languish there or to pay excessive penalties for their devotion. Indeed, by creative use of the law, it was possible to prove that officials combating the demonstrations were using the power of the police state to deny the black people equal protection under the law. This brought many of the cases squarely under the jurisdiction of the 14th Amendment. As a consequence of combining direct and legal action, far-reaching precedents were established, which served in turn to extend the areas of desegregation. And then this is what I'm going to do real quick. Let me see something real quick. I'm going to just turn that all right. Okay. All right, I had to turn it down. That was a loud motorcycle. I think that's what I'm gonna do when when something too loud come by. I'm just gonna turn the mic down. Okay. Let's see where we at. Okay, so I want to speak on that. One of the things that we have been dealing with right now is because of the spontaneity which this same movement was birthed and this same struggle was birthed from in Rockford, Illinois. That has been one of the things that we have been behind the 8 ball on, is having strong and concise legal. I don't want to say legal representation. That's, even though that's true too, but having strong and concise legal parameters in which we were waging the struggle in, and as just as concise as the ones that we have in the streets. As far as, and I say that to say, you know, again, in reference to people being falsely arrested and falsely prosecuted, you know, really persecuted, and that's one of the reasons why I have not pled guilty to any, charges or took any pleas to any charges, because I do believe that we have to go into the courts and we have to prove that these charges that have been put against us are false, and we have to get not guilty verdicts, so that way we can have court cases to refer back to, and we can have things to refer back to say, no, this is within our rights to do these things. Every demonstration and protest which has taken place in Rockford, Illinois, hosted by the May 30th Alliance, has been completely within the legal guidelines, completely within our legal parameters, to assemble and to petition our government, and to protest and to demonstrate and to mobilize and to organize. The reason that we have been arrested and the reason that we have been prosecuted and persecuted is not because of the manner of the things that we have been doing, but because of what it is that we were speaking on these things, because of the determination and the dedication in which we displayed while doing these things, and because of the fear of these institutions of the political consciousness of this city being shaken and being changed. And so I do believe that we will have to take these things into court. I'm prepared to go into court. I'm prepared to go into the courtrooms of Winnebago County and to prove that I was within my rights to protest, within my rights to demonstrate, because I believe that it's going to take a mass movement to get these things changed, and we're going to need the ability to protest. We're going to need the ability to demonstrate. We're going to need the ability to mobilize, and I think nothing has been made that more clear than Tyrus Jones being attempted to be murdered. Nothing has made that more clear than Denzel Dufan attempted to be being murdered. Nothing has made that more clear than Faustin Guaitigo being murdered. Nothing has made that more clear than Jose Gonzalez Jr. attempted to being murdered. And so we will have to, the same way we have been fighting in the streets, we will have to fight in the courts. And I'm prepared for for my day in court. I'm prepared for that battle in court. Another reason for the delay in applying the lessons of Montgomery was the feeling abroad in the land that the success of the bus boycott was an isolated phenomenon, and that the black people elsewhere would never be willing to sacrifice in such extreme measure. When, in Albany, Georgia, in 1962, months of demonstrations and jailings failed to accomplish the goals of the movement, reports in the press and elsewhere pronounced nonviolent resistance a dead issue. There were weaknesses in Albany, and a share of the responsibility belongs to each of us who participated. However, none of us was so immodest as to feel himself master of the new theory. Each of us expected that setbacks would be a part of the ongoing effort. There is no tactical theory so neat that a revolutionary struggle for a share of power can be won merely by pressing a row of buttons. Human beings, with all their faults and strengths, constitute the mechanisms of a social movement. They must make mistakes and learn from them, make more mistakes and learn anew. They must taste defeat as well as success and discover how to live with each. Time and action are the teachers. And then I think that, again, that directly relates to what it is and to this moment in Rockford, Illinois, and to this moment in Winnebago County when it comes to the struggle that we are waging, because that is the place that we're in, where we're making mistakes and then we're learning how to recuperate from those mistakes. We're figuring out which tactics work and which tactics don't work. I tell people all the time that we aren't claiming to be perfect. We aren't claiming to have any type of perfect ideology. The only things that appreciate you. Y'all have a good day. The only thing that we're trying to do is to raise awareness to these things in whichever methods that we know best. Again, that doesn't always look beautiful, or that doesn't always, it's not always the most appealing thing. It's times where I look back on something and think, maybe this action could have been done this way, or this action could have been done that way, or maybe I didn't need to say this, or maybe I didn't need to say that. But I understand that that's with anything in life. This is, when I worked in retail, when I would go through a day after retail, I would think about things I could have done differently throughout the day. And so the same thing is going to happen with this. We're not going to be able to do anything perfectly. We're not going to be able to please everybody. There will always be people who disagree with certain tactics and or certain statements that are made. But our job is to try to make an action, look back on what pros came from the action, what cons came from the action, what gains came from the action, what losses may have came from the action, and then how can we alter that action to make that action have more gains and to have less losses, have more pros and have less cons, and then how can we continue to implement these actions into the struggle? How can we figure out which things what speeches or which things were said that resonated, and then which things that didn't resonate? How can we figure out which thing, having different conversations, from having different conversations and doing different lives, you figure out how to articulate certain issues or how to articulate certain thoughts that you wouldn't get if you didn't work through conversations, if you didn't work through dialogues, if you didn't work through monologues, if you didn't struggle with your own conscience, if you didn't struggle with your own beliefs, struggle with your own ideology. And so I think that that's something that is very important for us to understand and for people to understand, is that the goal is to get better with these things, is to gain more understanding, more wisdom from these things, more experience from these things. Experience is the ultimate teacher. Where we at? They must make mistakes and learn from them, make more mistakes and learn anew. They must taste defeat as well as success and discover how to live with each. Time and action are the teachers. When we planned our strategy for Birmingham months later, we spent many hours assessing Albany and trying to learn from its errors. Our appraisals not only helped to make our subsequent tactics more effective, but revealed that Albany was far from an unqualified failure. Though lunch counters remained segregated, thousands of Negroes were added to the voting registration rolls. In the gubernatorial elections that followed our summer there, a moderate candidate confronted a rabid segregationist. By reason of the expanded black vote, the moderate defeated the segregationists in the city of Albany, which in turn contributed to their victory in the state. As a result, Georgia elected its first governor pledged to respect and enforce the law equally. Our movement had been checked in Albany, but not defeated. City authorities have been obliged to close down bus lines to avoid integration. The authorities were crippling themselves, denying facilities to the white population in order to obstruct our progress. Someone observed that Samuel Johnson had called parks, quote, the lungs of a city, end quote, and that Albany would have to breathe again, even though the air too be desegregated. I butchered that last sentence. Sorry, y'all. But I think that this is something, again, this is something important to point out. Again, we're cross-referencing things and we're understanding tactics that were used in the past and how they may relate to things happening presently, and how things that could have took place in 1963 Albany, Georgia, or excuse me, in 1961. What year did he say this was in Albany? My fault. The book taking place 1962 Albany, Georgia. How can they relate to Rockford? So the city of Rockford last year arrested people and refused to shut down the street, refused to stop traffic on the street because of how they said it was too vital and too important. It just couldn't be done. The traffic couldn't be stopped. But because of the impact that we made during demonstrations, the impact we made during protests, the impact we made during march, and the impact that was made during walking on that crosswalk through megaphones and sirens and music, the impact that we made it so that when the next year came across, in 2021 presently, and in effect to try to limit us from having that same impact, from having that same effectfulness, they have cut off their nose to spite their face by shutting down this whole area. Any area we ever touched or we ever protested or marched or demonstrated at, they have shut down, and in effect to try to limit our impactfulness. And in doing so, they have limited the amount of traffic that can come through this street way more than we ever could have. And so that has now affected these different businesses on this street. The Subway said Subway at the end of the bridge said they only sold one sandwich between the hours of 5 to 7 at the first after the first city market. There were multiple people complaining about the amount of access to their businesses after the first city market. So it'll be interesting to see as this next week comes what type of information comes out. But again, that's the same thing as this city in Albany, because of how hard they were fighting against desegregation. They're shutting down their parks. They're shutting down their libraries, shutting down the bus lines, all in an attempt to avoid integration, all in an attempt to try to avoid the society shifting, the culture shifting. And so it's important to realize that these actions that are being taken by Thomas McNamara, these racist microaggressions, these racist diverting tactics and things of that nature, they have historically been taking place by governments and by institutions when change has been brought to their doorstep. Okay, and again, we're at the top of page 40 of Why We Can't Wait by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is Rockford reading. Even had nonviolent resistance been soundly defeated in Albany, even had nonviolent resistance been soundly defeated in Albany, the alacrity with which the bells were tolled for it must arouse suspicion. The prompt interment of the theory was not a judicious conclusion, but an attack. Albany, in fact, had proved how extraordinary was the black response to the appeal of nonviolence. Approximately 5% of the total black population went willingly to jail. Were that percentage duplicated in New York City, some 50,000 black people would overflow its prisons. If a people can produce from its ranks 5% who will go voluntarily to jail for a just cause, surely nothing can thwart its ultimate triumph. If, however, the detractors of nonviolence fell into error by magnifying temporary setbacks into catastrophic defeat, the adherents of the new theory must avoid exaggerating its powers. When we speak of filling the jails, we are talking of a tactic to be flexibly applied. No responsible person will promise to fill all jails everywhere at any time. Leaders indulge in bombast if they do not take all circumstances into account before calling upon their people to make a maximum sacrifice. Filling jails means that thousands of people must leave their jobs, perhaps to lose them, put off responsibilities, undergo harrowing psychological experience for which law-abiding people are not routinely prepared. The miracle of nonviolence lies in the degree to which people will sacrifice under its inspiration when the call is based on judgment. And then that directly relates to, what's going on in the city of Rockford when it comes around protests and demonstrations. And, a lot of these things, are being spoke of in better manners than I can speak of them. I just want to try to continue to remind people what we are cross-referencing and why we are cross-referencing. And so all of these things that Dr. King is pointing out about the methods and the ideology of nonviolent action directly relates to the nonviolent action that is taking place here in Rockford, Illinois by the May 30th Alliance. Black people are human, not superhuman. Like all people, they have differing personalities, diverse financial interests, and varied aspirations. There are black people who will never fight for freedom. There are black people who will seek profit for themselves alone from the struggle. And that's something that we've seen in City Market specifically in 2021, Rockford, Illinois. Again, this is in 1963, Birmingham, Alabama. This struggle is taking place. Dr. King is saying there are black people who will seek profit for themselves alone, from the struggle. And that's something that we are witnessing take place in front of our eyes. There are even some black people who will cooperate with the oppressors. Again, that's the same thing that we're seeing take place in front of our eyes. Kathy McDermott is an oppressor. Tom McNamara is an oppressor. Todd Cagnoni is an oppressor. Kyle Saunders is an oppressor. These different, Sheriff Caruana, Interim Chief Randy Burke, Carla Red, all of these different people that people pose pictures with their kids with these people. These people are oppressors. These people are exploiters. These people are fascist. And so we have to understand that there will be black people who will, in order to for them to gain, in order for them to have more. Oh shit! Oh damn. I'm gonna be here. Yeah, you too. You too. I'm gonna put this right here. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna get back in it. And so we have to understand how that directly relates to where we are at right now too. So that's something that we are seeing firsthand. Hey! So we have to understand how that directly relates to what we're going through. Okay, let's see. There are black people who will never fight for freedom. There are black people who will seek profit for themselves alone from the struggle. There are even some black people who will cooperate with their oppressors. These facts should distress no one. Every minority and every people has a share of opportunists, profiteers, freeloaders, and escapists. The hammer blows of discrimination, poverty, and segregation must warp and corrupt some. No one can pretend that because a people may be oppressed, every individual member is virtuous and worthy. The real issue is whether in the great mass, the dominant characteristics are decency, honor, and courage. In 1963, once again, life was proof that black people had their heroes, their masses of decent people, along with their lost souls. The doubts that millions have felt as to the efficacy of the nonviolent way were dissolved. And the black people saw that by proving the sweeping and majestic power of nonviolence to bring about the beloved community, it might be possible for them to set an example to a whole world caught up in conflict. And again, that's exactly where we stand today in 2021, in a whole world caught up in conflict. In the entire country, there was no place to compare with Birmingham. The largest industrial city in the South, Birmingham had become, in the 30s, a symbol for bloodshed when trade unions sought to organize. It was a community in which human rights had been trampled for so long that fear and oppression were as thick as its atmosphere as the smog from its factories. Its financial interests were interlocked with a power structure which spread throughout the South and radiated into the North. The challenge to nonviolent direct action could not have been staged in a more appropriate arena. In the summer of 1963, an army brandishing only the healing sword of nonviolence humbled the most powerful, the most experienced, and the most implacable segregationists in the country. Birmingham was to emerge with a delicately poised peace, but without awaiting its implementation, the black people seized the weapon that had won that dangerous peace and swept across the land with it. The victory of the theory of nonviolent direct action was a fact. Faith in this method had come to maturity in Birmingham. As a result, the whole spectrum of the civil rights struggle would undergo basic change. Nonviolence had passed the test of its steel in its fires of turmoil. The united power of Southern segregation was the hammer. Birmingham was the anvil. I want to read that last part one more time. Nonviolence had passed the test of its steel in the fires of turmoil. The united power of Southern segregation was the hammer. Birmingham was the anvil. Okay, this is Chapter 3, Bull Connor's Birmingham. If you have visited Birmingham before the 3rd of April in the 100th anniversary year of the black people's emancipation, you might have come to a startling conclusion. You might have concluded that here was a city which had been trapped for decades in a Rip Van Winkle slumber. A city whose fathers had apparently never heard of Abraham Lincoln, a racist. Just Dr. King didn't say a racist, but I'm telling you, Abraham Lincoln was a racist. Thomas Jefferson, a racist. Two schools named after them. I'm gonna keep on. My fault. The Bill of Rights, the preamble to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, or the 1954 decision of the United States Supreme Court outlawing segregation in the public schools. If your powers of imagination were great enough to enable you to place yourself in the position of a black baby born and brought up to physical maturity in Birmingham, you would have pictured your life in the following manner. You would be born in a Jim Crow hospital to parents who probably lived in a ghetto. You would attend a Jim Crow school. It is not really true that the city's fathers had never heard of the Supreme Court school desegregation order. They had heard of it and, since its passage, had consistently expressed their defiance, typified by the prediction of one official that blood would run in the streets before desegregation would be permitted to come to Birmingham. You would spend your childhood playing mainly in the streets because the, quote, colored parks were abysmally inadequate. When a federal court order banned park segregation, you will find that Birmingham closed down its parks and gave up its baseball team rather than integrate them. You would spend your childhood, if you went shopping with your mother or father, you would trudge along as they purchased at every counter, except one, in the large or small stores. If you were hungry or thirsty, you would have to forget about it until you got back to the black section of town, for in your city, it was a violation of the law to serve food to black people at the same counter with whites. If your family attended church, you would go to a black church. If you wanted to visit a church attended by white people, you would not be welcome. For although your white fellow citizens would insist that they were Christians, they practiced segregation as rigidly in the house of God as they did in the theater. If you love music and yearned to hear the Metropolitan Opera on its tour of the South, you could not enjoy this privilege. Nor could your white fellow music lovers, for the Metropolitan had discontinued scheduling Birmingham on its national tours after it had adopted a policy of not performing before segregated audiences. If you wanted to contribute to and be a part of the work of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, you would not be able to join a local branch. In the state of Alabama, segregationist authorities have been successful in enjoining the NAACP from performing its civil rights work by declaring it a, quote, foreign corporation, end quote, and rendering its activities illegal. If you wanted a job in the city, one of the greatest iron and steel producing centers in the nation, you had better settle on doing the menial work as a porter or laborer. If you were fortunate enough to get a job, you could expect that promotions to a better status or more pay would come, not to you, but to a white employee, regardless of your comparative talents. On your job, you would eat in a separate place and use a water fountain and lavatory labeled, quote, colored, end quote, in conformity to citywide ordinances. If you believed your history books and thought of America as a country whose governing officials, whether city, state, or nation, are selected by the governed, you would be swiftly disillusioned when you tried to exercise your right to register and vote. You will be confronted with every conceivable obstacle to taking that most important walk a black American can take today, the walk to the ballot box. Of the 80,000 voters in Birmingham, prior to January 1963, only 10,000 were black. Your race, constituting 2/5 of the city's population, will make up 1/8 of its voting strength. You will be living in a city where brutality directed against black people was an unquestioned and unchallenged reality. One of the city commissioners, a member of the body that ruled municipal affairs, would be Eugene, quote, Bull, end quote, Connor, a racist who prided himself on knowing how to handle the black people and keep them in their, quote, place, end quote. As Commissioner of Public Safety, Bull Connor, entrenched for many years in a key position in the Birmingham power structure, displayed as much contempt for the rights of the black people as he did defiance for the authority of the federal government. You would have found a general atmosphere of violence and brutality in Birmingham. Local racists have intimidated, mobbed, and even killed black people with impunity. One of the more vivid and recent examples of the terror of Birmingham was the castration of a black man whose mutilated body had then been abandoned on a lonely road. No black home was protected from bombings and burnings. From the year 1957 through January of 1963, while Birmingham was still claiming that its Negroes were, quote, satisfied, end quote, 17 unsolved bombings of black churches and homes of civil rights leaders had occurred. Black people were not the only persons who suffered because of Bull Connor's rule. It was Birmingham's safety commissioner who, in 1961, arrested the manager of the local bus station when the latter sought to obey the law of the land by serving black people. Although a federal district judge condemned Connor in strong terms for this action and released the victim, the fact remained that in Birmingham, early in 1963, no places of public accommodation were integrated except the bus station, the train station, and the airport. In Bull Connor's Birmingham, you would be a resident of a city where a United States senator visiting to deliver a speech had been arrested because he walked through a door marked, quote, colored, end quote. In Connor's Birmingham, the silent password was fear. It was a fear not only on the part of the black oppressed, but also in the hearts of the white oppressors. Guilt was a part of their fear. There was also the dread of change, that all too prevalent fear which hounds those whose attitudes have been hardened by the long winter of reaction. Many were apprehensive of social ostracism. Certainly Birmingham had its white moderates who disapproved of Bull Connor's tactics. Certainly Birmingham had its decent white citizens who privately deplored the maltreatment of the black people, but they remained publicly silent. It was a silence born of fear of social, political, and economic reprisals. The ultimate tragedy of Birmingham was not the brutality of the bad people, but the silence of the good people. And again, I think that I read through a lot there that is specific about a certain time in a certain area, and so I can understand where for some people that may not correlate. And to me, I can see how many it is so many American cities where you could go through and the depiction of Bull Connor's Birmingham would fit there. That's Carolina's Winnebago County. That's the same kind of description you would give to Carolina's Winnebago County. That was O'Shea's Rockford, the same type of description you could give to O'Shea's Rockford. But I think that the most poignant piece here comes at the very end of this portion that we just read, when it says, certainly Birmingham had its white moderates who disapproved of Bull Connor's tactics. And that's the same thing. I'm sure that there are plenty of white moderates in Rockford that disapprove of the memorials being torn down, or disapproved of the children that were pepper sprayed at City Market, or disapprove of the limiting of freedom of speech, or the limiting of freedom of assembly, or disapprove of the false arrest and trumped up charges that have been given to people. Certainly Birmingham had its decent white citizens who privately deplored the maltreatment of black people. I'm certain that Rockford has decent white citizens who deplore the maltreatment of Denzel Duvant, who deplore the maltreatment of Jose Gonzalez Jr., who deplore the maltreatment of Tyrus Jones, or deplore the maltreatment of Faustin Guaitigo, deplore the maltreatment that protesters have dealt with here. I'm sure that is something that's true. But they remain publicly silent. But that is the piece that is the most true, is that in 2021 in Rockford, Illinois, the people who deplore the maltreatment, the people who disapprove of the tactics, still remain publicly silent and disapprove privately. I keep an eye out. No, people be on. Okay, it was a silence born of fear of social, political, and economic reprisals. The ultimate tragedy of Rockford is not the brutality of the bad people, but the silence of the good people. In Birmingham, you would be living in a community where the white man's long-lived tyranny had cowed the people, led them to abandon hope, and developed in them a false sense of inferiority. You would be living in a city where the representatives of economic and political power refuse to even discuss social justice with the leaders of your people. You will be living in the largest city of a police state, presided over by a governor, George Wallace, whose inauguration vow had been the pledge of segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, end quote. You will be living, in fact, in the most segregated city in America. And I think that line is poignant because if you look up the RPS, the People Who Cares versus the RPS school district, you will see that in that lawsuit, it is stated that Rockford, Illinois, may have had the most segregated school system in America. And so, as we read in 1963, these things taking place in Birmingham, Alabama. Again, we want to cross-reference the things that are taking place in 2021 Rockford, or even the things that took place in 1983 Rockford, 1963 Rockford, which has reverberating effects into 2021 Rockford. All right, we're at the middle of page 49, Why We Can't Wait, by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There was one threat to the reign of white supremacy in Birmingham. As an outgrowth of the Montgomery bus boycott, protest movements have sprung up in numerous cities across the South. In Birmingham, one of the nation's most courageous freedom fighters, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, had organized the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, ACHR, in the spring of 1956. Shuttlesworth, a wiry, energetic, and indomitable man, had set out to change Birmingham and to end for all time the terrorist, racist rule of Bull Connor. When Shuttlesworth first formed his organization, which soon became one of the 85 affiliates of our Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Bull Connor doubtless regarded the group as just another bunch of troublesome, quote, niggers, end quote. It soon became obvious, even to Connor, however, that Shuttlesworth was in dead earnest. ACHR grew month by month to become the acknowledged basic mass movement of the Birmingham black people. Weekly mass meetings were held at various churches. The meetings were packed. ACHR began working through the courts to compel the city to relax its segregation policies. A suit was instituted to open Birmingham's public recreation facilities to all of its citizens. It was when the city lost this case that the authorities responded by closing down the parks rather than permit black youngsters to share facilities maintained by the taxes of black and white alike. Early in 1962, students at Miles College initiated a staggered series of boycotts against downtown white merchants. Shuttlesworth and his fellow leaders of ACHR joined with the students and helped them to mobilize many of Birmingham's black people in a determined withdrawal of business from stores that displayed Jim Crow signs, refused to hire black people in other than menial capacities, refused to promote the few black people in their employ, and would not serve colored people at their lunch counters. As a result of the campaign, business fell off as much as 40% at some downtown stores. Fred was leading a militant crusade, but Birmingham and Bull Connor fought tooth and nail to keep things as they were. Okay, and then this is a point that I think is highly important for some of the things that have been brought up here. I want to go through this sentence one more time. As a result of the campaign, business fell off as much as 40% at some downtown stores. Now, for the people who continuously complain to us about these small businesses at City Market or vendors at City Market and them losing money or being minority vendors, 60% minority in women, and that's not what I agree with the message, but I don't agree with these people losing money. This is how demonstrations, this is how protests, this is how movements have been waged historically. When you live in a capitalistic society, I appreciate you, man. Thank you. You have a good day. Thank you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. When you live in a capitalistic society, you must attack capital. You must speak the same language as the people that you are trying to communicate with. And the language that American cities speak is capital. The language that Rockford speaks is capital. The language that Winnebago County speaks is capital. And City Market is a place in which they have put a lot of capital, in which they plan to receive a lot of capital, whether that be capital in the form of currency or capital in the form of imagery and propaganda, things of that nature. Okay, let's see. Where we at? All right, we're at the top of page 51. As the parent organization of ACHR, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta had kept a close and admiring watch on Fred Shuttlesworth's uphill fight. We knew that he had paid the price in personal suffering for the battle he was waging. He had been jailed several times. His home and church had been badly damaged by bombs. Yet he had refused to back down. This courageous minister's audacious public defiance of Bull Connor had become a source of inspiration and encouragement to black people throughout the South. In the May 1962 board meeting of SCLC at Chattanooga, we decided to give serious consideration to joining Shuttlesworth and ACHR in a massive direct action campaign to attack segregation in Birmingham. It happened that we had scheduled that city as the site of our forthcoming annual convention in September. Immediately after the board meeting, rumors began to circulate in Birmingham that SCLC had definitely decided to support Fred's fight by mounting a prolonged campaign in that city at the time of the convention. These rumors gained so much impetus that stories supporting them appeared in the daily press. For the first time, Birmingham businessmen who had pursued a policy of ignoring demands for integration became concerned and concluded that they would have to do something drastic to forestall large-scale protests. Several weeks before our convention was scheduled, the business community began negotiating with ACHR. I gotta get it off. I like something to drink too while I'm at it. ACHR meeting with the White Senior Citizens Committee were Shuttlesworth, Dr. Lucius Pitts, president of Miles College, A.G. Gatson, wealthy businessman and owner of the Gatson Motel, Arthur Shores, an attorney with wide experience in civil rights cases, the Reverend Edward Gardner, vice president of ACHR, and insurance broker John Drew. After several talks, the group came to some basic agreements. As a first step, some of the merchants agreed to remove the Jim Crow signs from their stores, and several actually did so. The businessmen further agreed to join in a suit with ACHR to seek nullification of city ordinances forbidding integration and lunch counters. It appeared that a small crack had opened in Birmingham. Although wary of the permanence of these promises, the black group decided to give the merchants a chance to demonstrate their good faith. Shuttlesworth called a press conference to announce that a moratorium had been declared on boycotts and demonstrations. However, to protect the position of ACHR, he made it clear that his organization's parent body, SCLC, would be coming to Birmingham for its convention as planned, and informed the press that after the convention, SCLC would be asked to return to the Steel City to help launch an action campaign if the pledges of the business community were violated. Bull Connor had been issuing ominous statements about our forthcoming meeting. When he realized that his threats were frightening no one, he began to try to intimidate the press by announcing that the press cards of any, quote, outside reporters, end quote, would be taken away from them. It was clear that Connor felt the bastions of segregation could be most securely maintained in Birmingham if national exposure could be avoided. The SCLC convention took place in September 1962, as scheduled. Shortly thereafter, Fred Shuttlesworth's fears were justified. The Jim Crow signs reappeared in the stores. The rumor was that Bull Connor had threatened some of the merchants with loss of their license if they did not restore the signs. It seemed obvious to Fred that the merchants had never intended to keep any of their promises. Their token action had merely been calculated to stall off demonstrations while SCLC was in the city. During a series of lengthy telephone calls between Birmingham and Atlanta, we reached the conclusion that we had no alternative but to go through with our proposed combined action campaign. Along with Fred Shuttlesworth, we believed that while a campaign in Birmingham would surely be the toughest... Oh shit, he turning up. Along with Fred Shuttlesworth, we believed that while a campaign in Birmingham would surely be the toughest fight of our civil rights career, it could, if successful, break the back of segregation all over the nation. This city had been the country's chief symbol of racial intolerance. A victory there might well set forces in motion to change the entire course of the drive for freedom and justice. Because we were convinced of the significance of the job to be done in Birmingham, we decided that the most thorough planning and prayerful preparation must go into the effort. We began to prepare a top-secret file which we called, quote, Project C, end quote. The C for Birmingham's confrontation with the fight for justice and morality and race relations. And so I want to point out, this motorcycle loud as hell, ain't it? Okay, and so I want to point out a few things in this last little passage that we read. The city had been the country's chief symbol of racial intolerance. I think that if you look into what is going on in Rockford, Illinois, if you look into the police terrorism and mass incarceration and racial injustice in the city, if you look into the history of the city, of the racial divide of the city, of the divestment of resources from areas of the city, the attempted containment of minorities and black and brown people in this city, you realize that this city is, I say it all the time, this city is a microcosm of all the issues of police terrorism in the United States of America. The city of Rockford, Illinois is a microcosm of all the issues of mass incarceration in the United States of America. And the city of Rockford, Illinois is a microcosm for all issues of racial injustice in the United States of America. And I say that to just say that any issue that is prevalent in the society of the United States of America as a whole is prevalent in the society of Rockford, Illinois specifically. And so I do 100% believe that this city is a chief symbol of police terrorism. This city is a chief symbol of mass incarceration. This city is a chief symbol of racial injustice. And so a victory against that chief symbol of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice can very well help to alter the entire course of drive for freedom and justice in this country when it relates to the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And so I think that we have to understand the importance that a victory in a city as corrupt as this city can be, especially when it's time for that to be extrapolated and for other cities to be inspired by the actions taking place here. Okay, we're on the top of page 54. This is Why We Can't Wait by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And again, this is the Rockford reading. This is a thing that we've done multiple times here where as an organization, we read through a book, and as we're reading through it, we dissect how the issues being brought up in the pieces of literature directly relate to the events and the things that are going on in 2021 Rockford, Illinois. So let's hop back in it. Please, if you're watching this, please share this too. Share this. Justice for Faustin, justice for Tyrus, justice for Denzel, justice for Jose, justice for Mikey Guzman, justice for Eddie Patterson, justice for Lil Mike Sago, justice for Joseph McCormick, justice for Jovan Fresco, justice for Kerry Blake, justice for Logan Bell, justice for Demetrius Bennett, justice for Suzette Babler, justice for Philip Johnson, justice for Jasper Banks, Man. Justice for Shannon Graves. Justice for them all. Free them all. Okay, let's hop back in. In preparation for our campaign, I called a 3-day retreat and planning sessions with FCLC staff and board members at our training center near Savannah, Georgia. Here we sought to perfect the timetable and discuss every possible eventuality. In analyzing our campaign in Albany, Georgia, we decided that one of the principal mistakes we had made there was to scatter our efforts too widely. We have been so involved in attacking segregation in general that we have failed to direct our protest effectively to any one major facet. We concluded that in hardcore communities, a more effective battle could be waged if it was concentrated against one aspect of the evil and intricate system of segregation. We decided, therefore, to center the Birmingham struggle on the business community, for we knew that the black population had sufficient buying power so that its withdrawal could make the difference between profit and loss for many businesses. Stores with lunch counters were our first target. There is a special humiliation for the black people in having their money accepted at every department in the store except the lunch counter. Food is not only a necessity, but a symbol, and our lunch counter campaign had not only a practical, but a symbolic importance. 2 weeks after the retreat at our training center, I went to Birmingham with my able executive assistant, the Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, and my abiding friend and fellow campaigner from the days of Montgomery, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, SCLC's treasurer. There we began to meet with the board of ACHR to assist in preparing the black community for what would surely be a difficult, prolonged, and dangerous campaign. Man, it's pulp in this. Oh, it's pulp in this. I shouldn't even be drinking this on camera. I'm sorry. We met in the now famous Room 30 of the Gatson Motel, situated on 5th Avenue North in the Black Ghetto. This room, which housed Ralph and myself and served as the headquarters for all of the strategy sessions in subsequent months, would later be the target of one of the bombs on the fateful and violent Saturday night of May 11th, the eve of Mother's Day. The first major decision we faced was setting the date for the launching of Project C. Since it was our aim to bring pressure to bear on the merchants, we felt that our campaign should be mounted around the Easter season, the second biggest shopping period of the year. If we started the first week of March, If we started the first week of March, we would have 6 weeks to mobilize the community before Easter, which fell on April 14th. But at this point, we were reminded that a mayoral election was to be held in Birmingham on March 5th. The leading candidates were Albert Boutwell, Eugene, Bull Connor, and Tom King. All were segregationists, running on a platform to preserve the status quo, yet both King and Boutwell were considered moderates in comparison to Connor. We were hopeful that Connor would be so thoroughly defeated that at least we would not have to deal with him. Since we did not want our campaign to be used as a political football, we decided to postpone it, planning to begin demonstrations 2 weeks after the election. Meanwhile, Wyatt Walker was detailed to return to Birmingham and begin work on the mechanics of the campaign. From then on, he visited Birmingham periodically, unannounced, organizing a transportation corps and laying the groundwork for an intensive boycott. He conferred with lawyers about the city code on picketing, demonstrations, and so forth, gathered data on the probable bail bond situation, and prepared for the injunction that was certain to come. In addition to scheduling workshops on nonviolence and direct action techniques for our recruits, Wyatt familiarized himself with downtown Birmingham, not only plotting the main streets and landmarks, parentheses, Target stores, City Hall, Post Office, etc., in parentheses, but meticulously surveying each store's eating facilities and sketching the entrances and possible paths of ingress and egress. In fact, Walker detailed the number of stools, tables, and chairs to determine how many demonstrators should go to each store. His survey of the downtown area also included suggested secondary targets in the event we were blocked from reaching our primary targets. Okay, and so now I want to get into, because this is in this portion here, you see the tactics that are being spoken upon, and the methods and the methodology that's being spoken on, and you see the ways that they are enacting those tactics. And this person is going doing surveillance, and I bring that up to say that these are all things that we have put into actions that we are taking. These are the things that must be put into actions and must be put into direct actions. Is scouting the areas, is figuring out which things will have impactfulness and which things won't have impactfulness, which areas will be impactful, which areas won't be impactful, figuring out what your target is, figuring out the reason for whatever that target is, figuring out different objectives that you need, and then also being able to calculate what the opposing side will do, being able to calculate how these institutions will try to prevent you from using your rights to protest and assemble, trying to calculate how police, whether the institutions be the police or the city government, how ways that they will try to hinder the voice of the movement. And again, these are things that are taking place in 1963 Birmingham, Alabama, and these things still, relate directly to the issues and the things that have taken place here in 2021 Rockford. And so the importance of going through these is, again, to not just get arbitrary information or to just hear stories about history, but to be able to cross-reference and cross-examine the things that are contained in this literature in the manner in which they went about trying to wage their struggle, and figuring out which portions of these things can be used to wage the struggle that we are in, can be used to, this is a struggle against segregation. We're in a struggle against police terrorism and mass incarceration and racial injustice. And so, again, we... by learning the things that our predecessors have done in efforts to achieve liberation, we will learn things that we can do and steps that we can take in our efforts to achieve that same liberation. His survey of the downtown area also included suggested secondary targets in the event we were blocked from reaching our primary targets. By March 1st, the project was in high gear and the loose ends of organizational structure were being pulled together. Some 250 people have volunteered to participate in the initial demonstrations and have pledged to remain in jail at least 5 days. At this point, the results of... Oh, yeah, he turning up. I like this song. He bumping Exhibit. Oh, no, is that Exhibit? That's Exhibit. Yeah, I think that's Exhibit. Okay. Some 250 people have volunteered to participate in the initial demonstrations and have pledged to remain in jail at least 5 days. At this point, the results of the March 5th election intervened to pose a serious new problem. No candidate had won a clear victory. There would have to be a runoff vote to be held the first week in April. We had hoped that if a runoff resulted, it would have been between Boutwell and King. As it turned out, the competing candidates were to be Boutwell and Connor. Again, we had to remap strategy. Had we moved in while Connor and Boutwell were electioneering, Connor would undoubtedly have capitalized on our presence by using it as an emotion-charged issue for his own political advantage, waging a vigorous campaign to persuade the white community that he, and he alone, could defend the city's official policies of segregation. We might actually have had the effect of helping Connor win. Reluctantly, we decided to postpone the demonstrations until the day after the runoff. We would have to move promptly if we were still to have time to affect Easter shopping. We left Birmingham sadly, realizing that after this second delay, the intensive groundwork we had done in the black community might not bring the effective results we sought. We were leaving some 250 volunteers who had been willing to join our ranks and to go to jail. Now, we must lose contact with these recruits for several weeks. Yet we dared not remain. It was agreed that no member of the SCLC staff will return to Birmingham until after the runoff. In the interim, I was busy on another preparatory measure. Realizing the difficulties that lay ahead, we felt it was vital to get the support of key people across the nation. We addressed confidential letters to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Congress of Racial Equity, the Congress of Racial Equality, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Southern Regional Council, telling them of our plans and advising them that we might be calling on them for aid. We corresponded in the same vein with the 75 religious leaders of all faiths who had joined us in the Albany movement. In New York City, Harry Belafonte, an old friend and supporter of SCLC, agreed to call a meeting at his apartment. Approximately 75 New Yorkers were present. They were a cross-section of citizens, including newspapermen, who kept their promise not to publish stories about the meeting until the action was launched, clergymen, business and professional people, and unofficial representatives from the offices of Mayor Wagner and Governor Rockefeller. Fred Shuttlesworth and I spoke of the problems then existing in Birmingham and those we anticipated. We explained why we had delayed taking action until after the runoff and why we felt it necessary to proceed with our plans whether Connor or Boutwell was the eventual victor. Shuttlesworth, wearing the scars of earlier battles, brought a sense of the danger as well as the earnestness of our crusade into that peaceful New York living room. Although many of those present had worked with the SCLC in the past, there was a silence almost like the shock of a fresh discovery when Shuttlesworth said, quote, "You have to be prepared to die before you can begin to live," end quote. I want to sort of speak on that. I think that that's something that in these last 12 months, I think that's a saying that people hear a lot. Like something like you have to, freedom's not free, or the price of freedom is death, or you have to, in order to live, you have to be willing to die, or you haven't found anything to live for if you haven't found anything to die for. I think sometimes that can be tossed around in a very rudimentary way, or a very blase way, or very, just like a thing to say as a, just like a catchphrase or a line or something like that. But one of the things that I have truly found in these last 12 months is how deeply that saying resonates with me. How deeply I think more deeply about that saying now, with having found something that I'm willing to die for, with having found something that I'm willing to lose my freedom for, with that having found something that I'm willing to commit a lifelong struggle for. And that's not something that I say lightly. My first interactions with demonstrations and with protests was coming up on a year now, on May 30th, and I went there after seeing people lose limbs on Twitter from rubber bullets, after seeing people be falsely arrested, after seeing people be pepper sprayed and tear gassed online in all of these different cities while trying to come out and assemble and use rights that are supposed to be constitutionally given and granted, and rights that should be just ours by birth as being humans on this planet. And so I went into that day with those things on my mind, with having seen those things. So I had a preparedness for that, prepared for the worst, a hoping for the best mind state, but a prepared for the worst mind state. And that's been something that I've since had to carry over into every 24 hours in which I live now, in which every 24 hours in which I exist now. And I don't think that I would be able to do that if I did not believe completely and fully in what it is that we're struggling for and what it is that we're fighting for. And in the midst of gaining that, in the midst of having that belief, in the midst of being willing to die for something, being willing to risk freedom for something, I agree that that is the most free that I've ever been. Walking on that crosswalk is the most free that I've ever been. Some of the nights that I sleep in front of City Hall is the most free that I've ever been. When we put back up those memorials, when even, as the moment right before they put those handcuffs on me, it's the freest that I've ever been. It's the freest that my spirit has ever been. It's the freest that my freest existence that I've had in this society. And I understand that the reason that I'm being handcuffed, the reason that my freedom is being taken away in those moments is because of the fear these institutions have of everybody reaching for those moments, of everybody finding their own crosswalk and finding those own moments of freedom, and pure freedom, of not a pure free will of what's up with it, and so I just think, again, that's something that resonates very heavily. You have to be prepared to die before you can begin to live. When we have finished, the most frequent question was, quote, "What can we do to help?" End quote. We answered that we were certain to need tremendous sums of money for bail bonds. We might need public meetings to organize more support. On the spot, Harry Belafonte organized the committee, and money was pledged the same night. For the next 3 weeks, Belafonte, who never does anything without being totally involved, gave unlimited hours to organizing people and money. Throughout the subsequent campaign, he talked with me or my aides 2 or 3 times a day. It would be hard to overestimate the role this sensitive artist played in the success of the Birmingham Crusade. Similar meetings were held with 2 of our strongest affiliates, the Western Christian Leadership Conference in Los Angeles and the Virginia Christian Leadership Conference in Richmond. Both pledged and gave their unswerving support to the campaign. Later on, with the NAACP and other local organizations, the Western Conference raised the largest amount of money, some $75,000, which has ever been raised in a single rally for the SCLC. Many of the men from these conferences would later join our ranks during the crisis. With these contacts established, the time had come to return to Birmingham. The runoff election was April 2nd. We flew in the same night. By word of mouth, we set about trying to make contact with our 250 volunteers for an unadvertised meeting. About 65 came out. The following day, with this modest task force, we launched the direct action campaign in Birmingham. I'm going to try that one more time. I butchered that because that's the end of the chapter. By word of mouth, we set about trying to make contact with our 250 volunteers for an unadvertised meeting. About 65 came out. The following day, with this modest task force, we launched the direct action campaign in Birmingham. So the direct action campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, was launched with 54 people. And if you don't know anything about, we're going to keep going through this and you'll see how significant this campaign is historically. But again, it was launched with 54 people. That's what it started with. And then even if you trace it back, it started before that. And before it got to 63 and 58, it started with Shuttlesworth forming the organization. That's 5 years. He formed this organization and built it and cultivated it and worked on the conscience and shook the community out of their lethargy for 5 years before 1963 came. And they were able to capitalize on all that groundwork that had been done. And so I think that's a perfect spot to end it at. We are about to be on chapter 4, New Day in Birmingham, page 61. I'm going to end this live because I need to go and try to use the bathroom and do a few other things. So I'm going to end this live, but I am going to we're all going to do some more lives tonight. I'm not 100% sure if they will be Rockford readings. I do know we will do another live from Occupy City Hall, do some conversing. So please stay tuned. Please share this video. Go through if you're watching this on Facebook and you have not already liked the May 30th Alliance page, please like the May 30th Alliance page. If you're watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed to the May 30th Alliance page, please subscribe to the May 30th Alliance page. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, follow us on TikTok. We outside. I'm gonna end this.